I guess just as we're in the middle of our second lockdown, it's just a little bit something God's put on my heart that I thought I wanted to share for people as individuals, but also as the church as a whole. And I was reading through Deuteronomy chapter 1 the other day, and we find the Israelites just outside of the land that God promised them. God had led them out of Egypt. He delivered them from slavery, delivered them through the wilderness, and they were just miles away from everything that God had promised them. And they're so close that they sent out scouts to go and see the land, to see what was in it. And these scouts, these spies, they came back and they brought with them fruit and harvest from the land. And they said, this land that God has promised us is good, but it is filled with giants, men so strong that we look like grasshoppers in comparison. And despite everything that God had carried them through to that point, all the signs and the wonders that he performed in Egypt, splitting of the sea so that they could escape captivity, still knowing all of that, living through all that and seeing all that, still they wavered. God had done the hard part at every turn for them. He had gained them their freedom and he had guided them to the edge of the promised land. But despite all of that, they let their fears rule them. Despite seeing everything God had done, everything that he had provided for them, they didn't trust in him to provide the very last bit, to take them over the edge into the promised land. And right now, as individuals and as a church, I feel like we are in a really similar place. As individuals, as people, we've made it this far. We've got through probably the most turbulent 9 months that most of us will ever or have ever experienced. God has brought us through the first lockdown, through social distancing and isolating and time away from friends and family and church, different to how we know it. But amongst that, God has delivered in so many incredible ways. He's made a way for people that needed help. He's supplied people with help. He's put people together who are able to help each other and thrive together in incredible ways. And as a church as well, for one church, we know what God has promised, what has been prophesied over us as a church, that two would come as one, that would flow as one river, and that God's going to come like a rushing river through Dover. And as we're in the midst of a second lockdown, I just feel like it's so important that we press on towards those promises, that we continue down the path that God has put before us. We have trusted God to bring us this far. Why should we stop now? Even if it seems impossible, we must press on into what God has promised. 10 of the spies that were sent came back, and they'd seen how good the land was. They knew it was as good as God had promised, but still they were overcome by fear of the men who occupied it. And over the last year, we've seen and heard what God has promised the church. And in the same way that God carried the Israelites out of Egypt, we've seen him bring two churches together into one. We've seen people adapt and grow into roles. We've seen online church take off with hundreds of views that we wouldn't have thought possible 10 months ago. But if there's one thing we can learn from the Israelites under Moses, it's do not quit on God's promises. Do not stop believing that God will make a way. Because when the Israelites gave up on that promised land, when they thought it was too much, it took them another 40 years to get back to that place. They wandered the wilderness for 40 years. But they still got what God was promising them. But I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait 40 years to see what God's plan is for Dover. I don't want to wait 40 years to walk in the plan that God has for my life. I don't want to wait 40 years to see his promises realised. I want to walk daily in what he has promised us. And I want to encourage you all to do the same at the moment. We've trusted in God to bring us this far, and he's going to take us further still. It's time now to press in, keep spending time with God, keep reading his word, and keep worshipping God, and keep walking in his promises.